Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajim. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is Musarrat and you are watching 5 W's of English Literature. In this video, we will talk about the career of William Shakespeare. It is not known definitively when Shakespeare reappeared and began writing after his lost years. But by 1592, there is evidence Shakespeare earned a living in London as an actor and a playwright. And several of his plays were on the London stage by 1592. Let's begin the career of William Shakespeare as a playwright. The September 20th, 1592 edition of the Stationers' Register includes an article, God's Worth of Wit, by London playwright Robert Greene. There is an upstart crow bedraggled with our feathers, and being an absolute Johannes factotum is in his own conceit the only shake scene in a country. Here, using shake scene, Greene wrote of Shakespeare as used here. Johannes factotum, jack of all trades, refers to a second-rate creator with the work of others. Greene's attack is the earliest surviving mention of Shakespeare's work in the theatre. Biographers suggest that his career may have begun any time from the mid-1580s to just before Greene's remarks. It means Shakespeare's active years are 1585 to 1613. By 1592, Shakespeare's renown, however, was transitory. Play scripts and their authors were accorded a lowly status in the literary system, and scripts were published to the link to the theatrical company rather than to the scriptwriter. It was only in 1597 that Shakespeare's name first appeared on the title page of his plays Richard II and a revised edition of Romeo and Juliet. Before this, Shakespeare wrote his plays for a company. After 1594, Shakespeare's plays were performed only by the company Lord Chamberlain's Men. This company was owned by a group of players including Shakespeare. Shakespeare was the managing partner in the Lord Chamberlain's Men, a company to which Shakespeare was connected for most of his career. After the death of Queen Elizabeth in 1603, the company changed its name to the King's Men after being awarded a royal patent by the new King James I. In 1599, Shakespeare and his business partners built their own theatre on the south bank of the Thames River, which they called the Globe Theatre. In 1608, the partnership also took over the Blackfriars Indoor Theatre from Henry Evans. Records of Shakespeare's property, purchases and investments indicate that his association with the company made him a wealthy man. By 1597, Shakespeare had already written and published 15 of his 37 plays. Several records show that at this time he purchased the second largest house for his family in Stratford called New Place. It was a 4-day ride by horse from Stratford to London, so it is believed that Shakespeare spent most of his time in the city writing and acting and came home once a year during the 40-day Lenten period when the theatres were closed. Throughout his career, Shakespeare Throughout his career, Shakespeare divided his time between London and Stratford. In 1605, Shakespeare purchased leases of real estate near Stratford for £440, which doubled in value and earned him £60 a year. This made him an entrepreneur as well as an artist, and scholars believe these investments gave him the time to write his plays uninterrupted. Career of William Shakespeare as an actor. Shakespeare continued to act in his own and other plays after his success as a playwright. According to the 1616 edition of Ben Jonson's Shakespeare, worked in Everyman in his humour in 1598 and Sejanus his fall in 1603. Although one cannot know for certain which roles he played. In 1610, John Davies of Hereford wrote that Shakespeare played kingly roles. In 1709, Rowe wrote that Shakespeare played the ghost of Hamlet's father. Later editions maintain that he also played Adam in As You Like It and the chorus in Henry V, though scholars doubt the sources of that information. Plays of William Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote his plays over the course of 2 decades, from about 1590 to 1613, but it's difficult to determine the exact chronology of his plays. He wrote a total of 37 plays revolving these themes: histories, tragedies, comedies, and tragicomedies. We can divide Shakespeare's work in 2 parts: early works written before 1600 and later works written after 1600. Early works. This work is written before 1600. Shakespeare's first plays were mostly histories and comedies. Before 1600, Shakespeare wrote only one tragic love story, Romeo and Juliet. Later works written after 1600. After 1600, Shakespeare wrote mostly the tragedies and tragicomedies, also known as romances. This is the list of the works written by Shakespeare. Histories: Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, Henry V, Henry VI Part 1, Henry VI Part 2, Henry VI Part 3, Henry VIII, King John, Pericles, Richard II. Comedies: All's Well That Ends Well, As You Like It, Comedy of Errors, Love's Labour's Lost, Mayor for Mayor, Merchant of Venice, Merry Wives of Windsor, Midsummer Night's Dream, Much Ado About Nothing, Taming of the Shrew, and Twelfth Night, Two Gentlemen of Verona. Tragedies: Antony and Cleopatra, Coriolanus, Cymbeline, Hamlet, Julius Caesar, King Lear, Macbeth, Othello, Timon of Athens, Titus and Andronicus, Troilus and Cressida. Tragicomedies: Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, The Tempest. Poems of William Shakespeare. In 1593 and 1594, Shakespeare published 2 narrative poems, Venus and Adonis and The Rape of Lucrece. He dedicated them to Henry Wriothesley, Earl of Southampton. These poems were influenced by Ovid's Metamorphoses. Poems of William Shakespeare. In 1601, in Robert Chester's Love's Marty, The Phoenix and the Turtle was printed. In 1609, a third narrative poem, A Lover's Complaint, was printed in the first edition of the Sonnets. In 1599, two early drafts of Sonnets 138 and 144 appeared in The Passionate Pilgrim without Shakespeare's permission. In 1609, the last of Shakespeare's non-dramatic works, the Sonnets, were published with 154 sonnets. It means that Shakespeare wrote 154 sonnets. The 154 sonnets are conventionally divided between two parts. One is Preludes sonnets. This part includes sonnets from 1 to 126, and these sonnets are about conflicted love for a fair young man. And the second part is called Dark Lady's Sonnets. This part includes sonnets from 127 to 152, and these sonnets are about uncontrollable lust for a married woman of dark complexion. Speculation about William Shakespeare. Around 230 years after Shakespeare's death, questions arose about the authorship of Shakespeare's plays. Scholars began to speculate that Christopher Marlowe, Francis Bacon, and Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, were the true authors of the poems and plays of William Shakespeare. Death of William Shakespeare. Shakespeare died on April 23, 1616, at the age of 52. Shakespeare was buried in the chancel of the Holy Trinity Church 2 days after his death. The exact cause of Shakespeare's death is unknown. According to John Ward, the vicar of Stratford, Shakespeare died of a fever because he drank too hard of the tributes from fellow authors. One refers to his relatively sudden death. We wondered, Shakespeare, that thou wentest so soon from the world's stage to the grave's tiring groom. Dear viewers, this is the end of life events of William Shakespeare part 2. If you like my video, please subscribe my channel, like my video, give a comment. Take care of yourself. Allah Hafiz.